Aislinn. Welcome to Collection Cutdown. If you want more information about what that is, I will hopefully link my introductory and explanatory video up here somewhere and definitely down below in the description. The TLDR version is that I have too many DVDs and I am rewatching them all in an effort to cut them back and reviewing them for this channel. Appropriately enough, we start with a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, 6 Bullets. I talked a little bit about how I have most of his movies in my introductory video. So I know that I said I was starting with A to Z, but actually my collection starts with numbers, so that's what we're going with. And 6 Bullets is the first one. Just worked out that way. So, what do I remember about 6 Bullets? Well, from my memory, the film is about Van Damme. He plays, I think he's either a law enforcement guy turned mercenary or a mercenary who's kind of given it up. Either way, the film begins with a dark moment that kind of changes his course. Sometime later, when Joe Flanigan of Stargate Atlantis fame, he's an MMA fighter. He comes to the Eastern European country where Van Damme lives. Presumably it's Romania, because a lot of these movies seem to have been shot there. They team up because Joe Flanigan's daughter, his wife and daughter came along with him on the trip. He's a fighter, he's there for a big fight he's doing, and his daughter gets kidnapped. And then for some reason they team up and Van Damme helps him find his daughter. So the funny thing is that I remember the setup of the movie and I remember nothing about the resolution of it. I don't remember the second half at all. So I don't know if I tuned out or if it just got really boring or if something else happened. So I'm very curious to see this again to remember how it all resolves itself and whether or not the second half is of any interest. So I kind of hinted at this dark moment that the film starts with that changes Van Damme's character's life. And what I think is very interesting about Van Damme is he has two very distinct phases in his career. So everything from Bloodsport, which was his first starring role, right through to The Order and Replicant, which were about 2001, I want to say. He's almost entirely shot big budget, fun, you know, adventure, action type movies. Well, I guess for Hollywood they're mid-budget movies. Don't take themselves too seriously and they all kind of have a similar vibe to them. Then a few years later, In Hell starts this new phase of Van Damme's career where the movies are much lower budget, but not in a bad way. He does tend to work with people who know how to use a smaller budget to best advantage. But the other thing is that the movies are a lot darker. People die, there's a lot, innocent people die, there's a lot more violence. His characters sometimes die, and even aesthetically they're darker. It's interesting just to see how sharp that divide is. There's just one film in between those two phases, Derailed, which we will talk about eventually. I tend to prefer the earlier stuff. I like action movies that don't take themselves too seriously, but I do think that a lot of his latest stuff does tend to be a good example of what you can do with a smaller budget. There are some actors who have made similar sort of moves into lower budget who have not had such quality films. So I do think that that's an interesting element to his career, and I'd be very curious to know why that happened. But yeah, anyway, so the dark moment that I referred to in this, this is very much a later Van Damme movie. It's a bunch of innocent kids, I think it is, die. and so and it's his fault. So that is something that he has to deal with throughout the course of the film from memory. Presumably he gets some kind of redemption at the end of the movie. So, but yeah, that kind of stuck with me because, you know, it's not every day that you see your heroes cause the death of children. At least I think it's children. It could be like young women, but I'm pretty sure it's kids. So, spoiler alert if you wanted to see that. It happens in the first 5 minutes anyway. So, yeah, this is going to be a good one for us to start with, and I'm really interested to see how I like this film on a rewatch. So, I guess I'll see you guys again in 2 hours. So, I'm back. I have seen Six Bullets again, and guess what? I was mostly right about what it's about. First and only time I saw it was a couple of years ago, so it wasn't that long ago that I saw it. But, you know, my memory's not failing me, always great. I was right about it being Van Damme plays a mercenary who's kind of given up the life, and his specialty used to be finding children that had been sold into sex trafficking due to the incident that I mentioned. He'd given that up. The second half of the film that I said I didn't remember, fairly standard action movie fare. Van Damme and Joe Flanigan's characters kind of kill a lot of people, fight a lot of people, do that sort of thing. What I hadn't remembered, which I really liked, was that the wife also had quite a big part. She was actually kind of the brains of the operation, and so she was the one who like noticed stuff and came up with plans, while Joe Flanigan was kind of the muscle, which made a lot of sense given that he was an MMA fighter. But it was nice that they gave the female character something to do, which not always the case in movies like this. And I also liked that the girl who had been kidnapped also played a part in her own rescue. She was smart enough to find her cell phone and get her parents to track it and things like that. So there were some really good things about this movie that I didn't remember. I can see why I forgot about the second half though. There was some good stuff in there. There was one particular scene where Jean-Claude Van Damme's character thinks that he has failed again, like a repeat of the past. And throughout the movie, he's been haunted by the ghosts of these kids that he had accidentally been responsible for the deaths of. I think that Van Damme is a very underrated actor. I know that may be controversial. I don't think he'll ever win an Oscar or anything, but I think he's actually really quite good, and there's scenes in all of his movies that I think prove that, and this is one of them. So there's this scene, he thinks he's failed again, and his reaction and his devastation in that moment is really quite real and affecting. More so than you may expect from a movie like this to give it that much depth of character. So, yeah, that I really enjoyed. Other things I didn't love so much, I'd forgotten that he was a butcher, so there was like lots of shots of meat everywhere. Not my favourite thing. The low budget did occasionally hurt it. You know, there was a few sort of shots that didn't make much sense or that could have been better. But there were some that were actually really good. There was a few that were really nice shots. The way the camera was moving and stuff like that. You know, better than you really have any right to expect in a movie like this. I was wrong about where it was set. I said Romania. It was filmed in Romania, as I suspected, but it was actually set in Moldova. So another thing that I actually really quite liked about this film, seeing it again, was that they gave the parent characters an arc, and considering that they're not really the main characters, like I expected one for Van Damme, particularly because I remembered that moment and knew that he would at the beginning and knew that he would need to find some redemption for that throughout the film. I hadn't remembered that the parents kind of got their own arc as well. Nice to see that the two of them kind of evolved together. Obviously, because their child was taken, they're willing to do anything to get her back. And so the two of them kind of go on this journey to see how deep that goes and exactly what they're willing to do, and the answer is pretty much anything. They get increasingly violent and are kind of okay with it, and that's like a plot point in a sense. Like in a lot of action movies, just a lot of violence happens and the characters don't really react to it, and that's standard operating procedure. But in this, it was kind of seemed to be more intentional, that there was a beat when they each killed somebody, and there was kind of like this moment where they think about it. They're like, oh, how do I feel about that? How do I feel about the fact that my spouse just murdered somebody? And they kind of have these little moments after each of that before, you know, just kind of going, yeah, you know what? It's our kid. We're willing to do whatever, and we're fine with that. So that was a nice element to this that you don't always get character development, you know, so that was really good. So another thing I had forgotten about this movie is that Chris Van Damme is in it. That is Jean-Claude's son. He's in quite a few of Jean-Claude's movies. He's actually alright. Like, I don't have a problem with it. He doesn't detract from the movie by being a terrible actor at all. Which was entirely possible. He doesn't seem to have much of an acting career on his own, but he's perfectly serviceable in any of his father's films. It was interesting though that they actually played father and son, which isn't always the case. It's always fun to see a little bit of nepotism like that, I suppose. So having said all that, I guess the real question is, how do I feel about Six Bullets after seeing it again, and do I want to keep it in my collection? And as I discussed previously, I like collections of actors. Jean-Claude Van Damme is one of them, and I was pretty much always going to keep it because of that. But it turns out that the movie itself, while a fairly standard action movie and doesn't elevate the genre in any way and doesn't really do much new or interesting, it's actually pretty watchable. So I'm really happy to keep this one in my collection for next time, when I'm sure I'll do a big JCVD binge. I guess the first movie is a keeper. Thank you very much for watching this review. Next time we are going to be discussing 7 Seconds, starring Wesley Snipes and Tamsin Outhwaite. Bye for now, and happy watching!
Mm-hmm.